So we begin a new series this month based upon, this year we're looking at the power of spiritual living. So each month we're looking at the power of something. This month we're working from a favorite of many of ours, The Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell. And some of you kids are too young to remember this, but back in the 80s, there was a big revolution in thought that happened, and Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell had this wonderful series on PBS about the power of myth and beginning to awaken an understanding and understand different ways of looking at reality. And so I've been a huge fan of Joseph Campbell. I've loved his work. I've done many a workshop based on that work around the hero's journey. And so it's fun for me to look at this today because what I see in the teachings of Joseph Campbell, helping us to understand the universal theme that comes through mythological story. You see, Joseph Campbell was a generalist, he refers to himself. He looks at the big picture. And he was able to identify and recognize this universal story that gets told over and over and over with different characters and different settings and different ways. But there's a universal story that is told, and it is about the sacred journey. We often talk about in this community about we're all trying to learn how to be in this place of spiritual being living in the human world. And I don't know about anybody else, but I struggle with this from time to time. I find myself going here to the human, going, oh my God, what's happening to my life? Freaking out about money or people or situations or wishing for and wanting this and all that sort of thing and all the forms and substances of my life. My well-being is determined by my circumstance. I know. You're all beyond that. I just like to know. Or I like to go, okay, well, I'm going to go get all spiritual. And that's how you say it in the South, spiritual. And so I go into my sacred space that I have created with soft, flowy music, and I have a little zafu cushion that I can sit on, and I light my incense, and I ring my chimes, and I have my Tibetan bells and bowls, and pretty much any device that has spiritual in nature. I've got cards, I've got it all, I am going to go Om, my way to bliss and to happiness. And I will be one with the all that is. And I want to stay there. But the problem is, we are here to be spiritual beings having human experience. Ours is a work that is done in the world. And so the real workshop, my friends, is not in the comfort of your own sanctuary with your zafu cushion and your favorite incense. Oh, no, no, no. Your real work, as I always like to say, is on I-15. Who am I now? If you want to test, just drive at rush hour and see if you're a beneficial presence in the world or not. Right? So the work of Joseph Campbell helps us to understand that there is a process of life unfolding. The mythology has helped us these myths that we study, that they're universal and timeless stories that reflect and shape our lives. They explore our desires, our fears, our longings, and provide narratives that remind us of what it means to be human. And so in days of old, when we were a race of hunters and gatherers, we developed stories that were told around campfires to help explain the sacred nature of things. And we know this because we have pictographs in various different places showing the hunt and showing the symbology. And we know that there were some stories that evolved around being hunters. And then we evolved and there was a step forward in consciousness where we began to understand that we could plant, that we could cultivate, that we could grow, that we didn't have to be nomadic, but rather we could be situated. And we created an agrarian society which changed much. The Chinese developed a thing called irrigation. And as they developed a thing called irrigation, they also developed a way of medicine based on the energetic patterns of flow in the body. You see, often we take our technology of the time and incorporate that into the stories. So then, I think a very powerful shift in consciousness happened for humanity not that many years ago when we sent spaceships out into space and they looked back and sent us pictures of a planet. And an awareness and consciousness that said we are one is trying to emerge. We could physically visualize what we've all sort of sensed and known. You see, very often the story of tribalism, that a tribe here develops their own story, and a tribe here develops their own story, and sometimes those stories become in conflict with each other. We just have to look to the Middle East to see. It's fascinating to me that you have three mythologies that have developed out of the same God and out of the same founding parents. And people kill each other on a regular basis over whose version is right. So the consciousness that evolves when we begin to see that we are all on one spaceship, all in this together. And as someone brilliantly said, the problem is you can't sink half the ship. Right? It all goes down. And so there is an emerging consciousness, whether we realize it or not, that is taking place on our planet. We've talked about this. It is represented in terms of neurological systems through the thing of internet and through cable news and through this awareness that we have of everything that's going on our planet at the same time. Just as your own personal nervous system has an awareness of what's happening in your body. So there is an evolution of thought and an evolution of consciousness that is recognizing our inherent wholeness, our inherent oneness. Now, it does not require that we become one, have one mythology, but rather that we celebrate and honor the diversity of these stories that we have told. Because when we begin to understand, as Joseph Campbell says, that these are universal stories told in different times and in different contexts, but there's literally one story. You see, the other great generalist in my life is a man by the name of Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, of science of mind. And he too was a generalist. He did not set out to create a new religion in the world. In fact, he was somewhat against having a new, or even organizing as a church in the early years. His idea was, what if we looked at all the common threads of religion, of science, of philosophy, and what if we looked at those and said, where are they the same? Not how are they different, but where are they the same? What are the universal truths that show up again and again and again? And he began to develop a spiritual philosophy based on the transcendentalists and based on Eastern traditions and based on all of this stuff to say, wow, there's a power for good in the universe greater than you are, and you can use it. That you can literally change your outer experience if you can change your inner experience. Now, most of us get this backwards. We're conditioned by the ways of the world that first you change your outer circumstance and then you have an inner experience. So we go about the world saying, boy, if I just had more money, surely I would be happy. Others say, boy, if I just had a spouse, then I would be happy. Still others say, if I could just get rid of this spouse, then I would be... Again, we're not raising hands on this one, okay? We'll just let it go there. Right? That as soon as my outer circumstance is better, then I will experience. But the teaching says there is a way of being in the world. When we recognize our oneness with the divine and we allow that divinity to be recognized and realized in the world, then there's a universal intelligence that works upon the consciousness to bring about new conditions. And so for those who've been in class, you know the teaching symbol, the circle with the three parts. And the top part is spirit, the divine intelligence. And it works through a law that produces form. We often use the analogy of a seed planted in soil produces of its own kind. Likewise, the seeds of our mind planted in proper soil bring forth new condition. It's great. If you don't understand that symbol, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, you're going to want to get into class. Because as somebody once said to me, I thought this was brilliant. They said, ever since I've been taking classes, you make a lot more sense. So obviously I've grown. Right? But the problem with this model, this cosmology, this understanding, is sometimes we think that there's something flawed with me if I'm not demonstrating perfectly. I hear people say things like, but Uncle Marty, oh, that's a different set of kids, Reverend Marty, I am affirming and I'm practicing this and I'm saying these things and I'm even meditating for 2.5 minutes every day. And still the conditions of my life aren't working. So there's another model we'll talk about a little bit in terms of, for me, this blessing that Joseph Campbell has given me is another circle that helps me understand the nature of reality and how it's unfolding. And that some of us are on a soul's journey. It's important to understand the purpose of myth. You see, these stories are a part of who we are, and when I say who we are, I mean as the human race. We have told stories about ourselves from the beginning, or at least when we were at least verbal enough to tell stories. And the stories have evolved, and the stories have changed, and there's 4 purposes that the myth serves. The first is mystical. Now listen to these words: myth, mythology, mystical, mysticism, mystery. They all have a root in that which is hidden behind. And so when we begin to sense the mystical aspect of this universal intelligence, that behind everything there is something unseen. And it would appear as if it is a unified and divine intelligence. You see, our quantum physicists of the day, Einstein and those great thinkers, are saying what the Bhagavad Gita and the ancient traditions were teaching us 5,000 years ago, yet in a different way. That it's all one, it's all connected, we're all part of some divine unfolding idea. So myth serves the purpose to help us understand that it opens the world to the dimension of mystery, to the realization of the mystery that underlies all. And Joseph Campbell uses this phrase that the universe becomes a holy picture. I love that. That when we see the universe around us, everything is a part of that holy picture. And so that mystical dimension is opened up through the power of myth. Then he says there's a cosmological dimension. And this is the dimension with which science is concerned. It is showing us what is the shape of the universe, helping us to understand the nature of the universe. It is showing us in such a way, but again, that the mystery is able to come through. How does this thing work? How do all these pieces fit together? And science goes about trying to explore the cosmological aspect. And so sometimes the stories are telling us this is how the universe works. He says there's a sociological aspect to myth. And that sociological aspect is supporting and validating a certain way of life. This is where myths vary enormously from place to place. You see, this is the stories we tell about why we do what we do, right? And those can vary widely. You know this, even in Salt Lake. If you're at 9th and 9th, and a hipster coolster, you tell a different story than if you're living in Provo. What do you call it? Happy Valley? Is that what you call it? Yes. Right? One story's not wrong. It's just these different stories, but often what we do is we begin to, this is where they get very divergent, and we start to talk about this is why we do what we do. You have mythology that is developed in your own culture, your own tribe, your own family. This is how we do it, right? This is the nature of who we are. So it's wonderful, but they can be very different. I thought it was appropriate for Utah. He uses this example about that you can find a whole mythology supporting polygamy, even as you can find a whole mythology supporting monogamy, right? Now, we'll leave that to others to decide, but you see, we can develop our stories around who we are and what we do. And when we're not careful, we may use our story to inflict harm on another, to say your story is not valid. And the last one, he says that this story, mythology is pedological. Now, that's way more letters than I know what to do with, so I looked it up and said, what the heck does that mean? Pedological is of or relating to teachers or education. So these stories are educational. And they're teaching us how to live a human lifetime under any circumstance. You see, often you'll hear me tell Bible stories or various stories from the context of not as a historical event, but as an event in consciousness. How these stories are teaching us how to be in the world, how to grow, how to evolve, how to change. We see the stories and the parables that Jesus was telling us, again, in an agrarian society. Why would he teach that? Because it made sense to the people. He didn't say whip out your iPhone and get your app, right? It was a little too far advanced, right? Would not have made sense. But what made sense is the nature of things. I was sharing recently that I kind of see that the mythology that is developing now has to do with the cyborg. This part human, part machine. And you see it in, movies and Iron Man, whatever, various different ones show up. But then I think about it and I was like, so how many of you have had the experience where you've left your significant other at home? And freaked out. Oh my God, how will I get through the day? Oh, that cyborg stuff, really? It's part of where we're evolving. That we are part human, part machine, right? And we tell these stories about who we are, exactly. So these are wonderful stories to help us understand this sacred journey. If I could have that slide, please. So I want to give you a quick run through the hero's journey. This is taken from Joseph Campbell's, kind of redacted from his work, The Hero with 10,000 Faces. But you see this universal story that we're all on. Here we are at the top of the chart in our ordinary world. I call it the realm of being fat, dumb, and happy. Life's good, just hanging out, right? And then something happens. Either a divine discontent, an inner longing that says, I must go explore this adventure, or circumstance is imposed upon us. The death of a loved one, the loss of something, a change in the economy, all that sort of thing happens, and all of a sudden we find ourselves cast into this. My friend Catherine McDowell said this to me years ago. I was talking recently about the two doorways that people come into this community. And it reminds me of that same thing. She said, love will pull you, or pain will push you, but you must go through that door. And it's that same thing for those of us who are on this path that are saying, I am going to live in a larger reality. I'm going to honor this sense of divine discontent, or perhaps you came into the community as I did, wounded and hurt and broken, looking for a different way to approach my life. However you get started on your call to adventure, you start. And before too long, you're given some supernatural aids, as he calls it. Remember, Dorothy gets the slippers right up front, has them the entire journey, but it's not until later that we know what to do with it. You see, so often we are given wisdom and insight, or I learned affirmative prayer well before I was able to really utilize it. It came in really handy as I moved through my journey. And then as the story unfolds, we reach a point where we're crossing the threshold. It's kind of a point of no return. Up until that point, there's opportunities to go back. Most of you, by the way, already gone. Too late. So now, this is where the story gets good, right? Because we don't make movies about, gee, we had 4 people over for dinner and talked about the bake sale. Right? The end. Right? Right? No, we want some action. We want some adventure. We want the hero or heroine to discover who they are because they've been challenged by life. That the dragons have shown up and they've slayed the dragons and they've done what was necessary to figure out their life. You know what I'm talking about, right? You've had dragons in your life, yes? And all of us can look to our lives and see that there were points in our lives when we thought, oh my God, this is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. And now with some wisdom and some age and some time, we see that even if it was the worst thing, it also in many ways was the best thing. That it became the catalyst for our greater soul's unfoldment. And so we hit that road of trials, but then there comes a point in every hero's journey where we hit the point of the supreme ordeal. Now, don't be dismayed by that. This is not by the magnitude of what's happening. It's the moment when we are face to face with the greatest demon of all. You know who I'm talking about, don't you? Luke Skywalker is going through this magical adventure. He teaches has this great little short teacher, his pointy ears and his green, Yoda. Doesn't recognize Yoda as a master, by the way. Some of you aren't recognizing the Yoda in front of you, I just want to say. But I digress. Let's go back. And so Yoda is teaching him tools. He's got all these cool things. He's got lightsabers and all this kind of stuff to prepare him to be the warrior. But then the moment comes, and Luke has to go into the cave, and Yoda says to him, you may take nothing with you. No, actually what Yoda says is, with you, nothing you may take. Because that's how Yoda talks. Right? And so he goes into the cave, and what he finds is he comes face to face with Darth Vader, which is actually himself. You see, there comes a moment in each one of our lives when we look in the mirror and say, oh my God, I'm the problem. Not me personally, I mean each of us. Just want to be clear about that. Lest they gather their pitchforks and torches, no. Right? We look in the mirror and go, oh my God, I created this reality, or I participated in this, and here's the good news. If I'm the problem, I'm also the solution. And so out of that experience, whatever it takes to get there, we emerge from that and realize on the other side of the supreme ordeal is where we find the gift. Wouldn't it be nice if they could just put it up front there, right? And so sometimes I often tell practitioners and practitioner students that it's when people are in the road of trials that they show up in your office. Can we pray this away? Right? That shouldn't be happening to me. But sometimes it's a part of the soul's journey. I've been sharing how my life has just gone through this, and all of a sudden, all the conformity of my life, how it was, is no more. Now, having done this a few times, I know I have enough wisdom to breathe. What do they tell women in childbirth? Keep breathing. Push and breathe. That's kind of how I feel. Just push on, breathe through it, because on the other side of this comes the great gift. And so when we begin to learn that, it's not about doing it wrong. It's not about not having the consciousness to manifest what we want when we want it, the way we want it, on time and in a powerful and meaningful way. Sometimes life is just wanting its soul's emergence, and the way that it has emerged is through what is happening. So for me, when we're going into prayer at this point, it's not to change the road of trials. It's not to get rid of the supreme ordeal. It's to breathe into the experience, to lean into the experience, and to have the grace and the wisdom and the clarity and the peace of the divine so that we find the gift. And when we find the gift, then we can return back into the world. We can return home. And we go home not as the person we were, but now as the master of two worlds. That's why I say what we're all working to do at one level and another is to achieve mastery over this spiritual human experience that we're having. When the master says, I am in the world but not of it, this is exactly what he's speaking to. That I can bring my spiritual consciousness into this world. That it is, I am not dismayed by the ways of the world, but rather I stand powerfully in the awareness of who I am, of the spiritual dimension of who I am. And now I am achieving mastery. I'm allowing myself to experience my higher good. No longer am I dependent on circumstance to provide my inner experience. I now know that my inner experience, my inner knowing, my inner being is what is determining my outer experience. It does not mean, just by the way, that you always get to have what you want the way you want it. That's a myth in the negative sense, like a lie, that we might as well let go of, right? But it does mean for those who are willing to go through this journey, to bring their spiritual awareness and consciousness to the journey, that we can have a life more expansive and more magnificent than we had ever imagined. And so for me, having gone through, now in the olden days, before I had this great wisdom, when I was in that, I tried to solve my problems through the power of alcohol. I'll get drunk, because we know that solves everything. Now I get high on the Spirit of God. Thank you. Amen. Right? Because we try and avoid. We try and, maybe you don't, maybe you have your own addiction. I don't know. We try and avoid. But for me, the awareness and the realization is just breathe through it. That my greater good, I now know that my greater good lies on the other side of this seeming challenge. And that this is the catalyst through which I can reveal and experience my higher self. And what I know time and time again is the good that awaits me is so much greater than I had initially envisioned. My life is so much better today than I ever dreamed I had the possibility. Do I still get to have it all the way I want when I want it? Unfortunately, not. Different planet. But on this planet, we can learn to live in a way of grace and with ease. So we'll be speaking of the Easter myth in a couple of weeks. And there's a corner of my consciousness that is still a Baptist that just cringes every time I say that. I hear my dear, sweet little grandma, Linus Baca, little Southern gal, good Southern Baptist. In fact, I was sharing. So my grandma experienced dementia in the later years of her life, and a lot of times she kind of checked out and went out wherever she went. And she checked back in from time to time. And, unexpectedly, my grandfather passed first. We always expected it would be the other way around. And so we were left with some decisions to make. And so we're like, let's create a service that we'll enjoy. And I had my minister, great metaphysician, come and do this beautiful ceremony. And afterwards I said to my grandma, well, honey, how'd you like it? And she said, son, we were Baptists. And I said, I thought to myself, really, of all the times you're going to check in, you're going to check in now? Oh, well, it's all good. I don't... But you see, having been through this, and we're all in it at some point or another, we've been through it, there's circles within this circle, we begin to realize that we don't have to struggle. That we can simply breathe into it and allow that greater good to unfold. And so we get the option of having it be painful and suffering through it, or as the Buddha said, releasing and letting go so that we can just experience the pain without the suffering. I believe that we are in a time of profound shift in consciousness. I believe in part it started in that moment that we were able to look back at ourselves and to see a new mythology is emerging that is not about tribalism but about globalism. There's only one of us here. As I said, you can't sink half the ship. We have seen the development of technology so that we have an internet that tells us anything about everything in any moment. We have cable news that tells us about what's going on anywhere in the planet at any time. We have a global nervous network system. You see, all of this is preparation for an evolutionary thought that can come forward. And this is why I think it's such an exciting time to be alive. It's such an exciting time to be part of giving birth to this. Even though, like all birth, it looks messy in the process, right? But something is emerging, and that is why I think so many of us feel this divine discontent, this inner longing, this sense that something is happening. And it's happening individually. I know it's happening for our community, and I believe that it's happening at a global level, that there is the emergence of a greater possibility trying to make itself known. And this is why it's important that we do our work, that we are contributing to the up-leveling of consciousness on this planet, that we do the inner work to be at peace within ourselves, that we do the work to bring forth the highest that was within us. And as we do that, we have a ripple effect in the consciousness of the world around us. Your practice matters, not only to you, but to the overall scheme of things. So I think we live in a very exciting time. I'm not sure where we are collectively on this journey, but I do know that something new and powerful is emerging. And it is an exciting time to be alive. And so when we have Lisa Bell's talking about living your vibrant life, and we have Linda Forrest talking about following your vision, and we have all of these things that we're doing is about getting in touch with that dynamic hero or heroine that is on this adventure to know him or herself fully and authentically and joyously. So I tell you, my friends, as I always do, that wherever you are on this journey, know that you are loved, that you are supported, that you are nurtured in being that fullest and highest self. Let us pray. As we simply breathe into the awareness of this one life, this one power, this one presence, even though it has 10,000 names, it is one. And so in whatever way we come in contact with this divine intelligence, we're opening our hearts to the presence of unconditional love, our minds to divine wisdom, the very portal of our soul to that oversoul. And as we breathe into this moment, we're simply sensing that there is something taking place within us. As we are recognizing our true spiritual identity, realizing that we are indeed each spiritual beings having this human experience. That we can be in this world but not necessarily be of it. That we can walk through our lives with grace and with dignity and with ease as we joyously accept our divine inheritance. So I'm speaking the word of truth this day as I recognize and know that wholeness is revealing itself as health and well-being, making itself known as vibrancy and vitality. I am speaking this word of truth as I recognize and know that we are each abundant beings right now, for we are one with the source and the substance of all good. I'm knowing that our lives are healed and transformed through the power of unconditional love. That joyously we give and joyously receive of the infinite bounty that is available. We freely and fully forgive ourselves and those who we perceived have harmed us. We're willing to move into that higher dimension, that higher state of being, willing to release and let go of that which no longer serves, to step into our greater yet to be. What a blessing it is to know this truth. And what a blessing it is to be blessed. And so we give thanks as we extend a blessing. We bless this spiritual community, knowing that it is divinely inspired, divinely guided into right and perfect action. We extend a blessing to our brothers and sisters around the planet this day. We're holding that high vision for a world that works for all, for a planet at peace. We're sensing harmony and peace and joy and love breaking out across the land. And as always, we bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, teachers of every faith. For we know there are many pathways to the divine, many myths to be told, many stories to be unfolded. So we bless and honor them all. In joy and gratitude, then, I am simply speaking this word of truth, releasing it to that law of mind, knowing that it is already established, already complete. I simply allow it to be so, as together we say, and so it is.